Good morning. My name is Naresh Lachmandas. I'm part of the Avasant Fellowship Program. And, Kevin shared with us this strategy from a perspective of the digital core and the vision. So as we talked about the structure for the new digital economy, the 4 pillars of digital singularity, and we're going to now focus a little bit more on driving this to execution, so from a strategy to execution perspective, and delivering these capabilities. So that's going to be our focus today. As we all observed, the digital innovation is really disrupting the leading market entities and companies and products. And so maintaining status quo is no longer an option. So, and to be ahead of the curve, we really need to drive change. So what I'd like to do now is, we have 3 panelists and here this morning from the medical and financial industries. We're going to share some of their experiences and help us learn. And so take us down the path of implementing disruptive technologies such as IoT, robotic process automation, analytics, et cetera. So I'll turn this over and like to introduce you to Michele Steele.
Good morning.
Michele Mosolgo and Patel. And Cal, thank you for joining. I just found out he just made it on a flight, so I'm not sure what Kevin pulled off to get him here in time. But welcome, Cal. So let's take a few minutes and have you folks just introduce yourselves to the audience.
Sure. I'm Michele Steele. I am a Vice President at OneAmerica Financial Partners in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I have responsibility for our business relationship management group. So we just did a very large reorg in IT over the last year and a half. And I started a new part of the organization that really helped partner with our business to understand their needs and problems that they're trying to solve, and bring that information in to truly shape the demand and focus on the projects that really provide business value and are going to help us compete over the next several years.
Thank you. Michele?
Also Michele, but this time Michele Mosolgo. So I work for Merck, and I'm privileged to be the CTO of an organization. It's called Healthcare Services and Solutions. So I've worked at Merck a very long time, pretty much every division across, mostly in IT, but then also across 6 continents. And I was asked to lead up a CTO role in our Healthcare Services and Solutions, which is a separate independent organization that focuses on revenue-producing businesses within the healthcare arena. The reason that's important is because it allows me to operate in a slightly different regulatory environment than I would in the formal pharmaceutical area. And in that, we've done a lot of things very different in the digital space. So I also work in some philanthropic areas in Africa and others where you can try some new technologies in a way that really makes a difference in people's lives.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to make it. I'm glad to be here with you. I've been in healthcare my whole career, starting on the clinical side, then to the business side, and now deeply focused on the technology, quote-unquote, digital health side of healthcare. At Flex, maybe a company that many of you are not familiar with, we help design, prototype, manufacture, and do logistics on pretty much every product category within a hospital or within a Best Buy, from Fitbits and Nespresso machines to hospital beds, et cetera. And within this area, I lead the digital health effort, which is how do we support the healthcare industry as it transitions from sort of what it's historically been, particularly around devices that are not connected and don't have intelligence either at all, or the intelligence is local and not connected into the ecosystem, to help drive that transformation along the lines that Kevin has been talking about.
Thank you, Cal. Michele, I'll start with you. So in the finance industry, sure there's some exciting opportunities that you're looking into from a robotics process automation standpoint. Maybe you could share some experiences.
Sure. So financial services, especially insurance, we're a little bit behind the curve. We're not on the bleeding edge. We're a mainly conservative company, but one of the things that have been really exciting for us that we've taken a journey on is really looking into what robotics process automation could do for us. We have a lot of legacy systems. We have a lot of manual processes. And over the last 2 months, we've actually done a proof of concept, proof of technology with an RPA tool on our employee benefits side of the house. And we saw some amazing uplift in efficiency with just 2 small use cases. When we look at how we bring in work into the organization, we have a pretty complex, robust, or complex proposal system. And so you have, folks on the ground that are actually manually keying in rates, information into proposals, and all they have to do is look away and they can key in a mistake. And what RPA can do for you is put that in and get into every system and get it done in 20 seconds, where it's taking our people 10 to 15 minutes on each proposal. So in proving that out, we've been able to show them that it's not so scary. We had to spend a lot of time with them, though, really helping them understand what RPA is and what it can do for them, and that it's not meaning a loss of jobs for them. It really means that is hours that we can put back into our business and truly focus on business value-added work, not what we would consider in Six Sigma as waste. So it's been pretty exciting for us. We're starting to look at how we set up a center of excellence around RPA as we move forward. And we've really taken our time around it because we've met with multiple companies, both in our industry and outside, to learn about the good, the bad, and the ugly on how you set up an RPA practice. And so we're taking all of those learnings and really starting from scratch to ensure that we do it right. And we do it at a pace that's good for us, but allows us to compete.
That's great with the operational efficiencies. As a follow-up question, so quoting a colleague of mine, a fellow, Bitcoin is that crazy shining object in leveraging blockchain. So is there, aside from the cryptocurrency side, is there anything you guys are looking at, any use cases in your company?
We're actually part of a consortium called LIMRA on the insurance side, and our lead architect actually went out to LIMRA on the East Coast, I think about a month or so ago, and we're actually looking at their Risk Block Alliance. So it's something that LIMRA is partnering with the Alliance on to create this risk block and really start building out use cases for what it means for the insurance industry. And there's some pretty exciting things that they're starting to do in building those use cases that we in the industry can get together and take a look at differently, because we're all challenged with the same problems. We all have legacy systems. We all have systems that we've built and have been spaghettied together over time. We have issues with fee and billing and how we look at our general ledgers. And so this is really an opportunity for us to do something that's very unique, where we wouldn't have to spend hours and hours and thousands and millions of dollars of development time. We could become part of a risk block and part of a group where, we're all collaborating together. So it's pretty exciting for us.
Excellent. Michele, a turn over to you. So you developed a comprehensive digital strategy implementing life-saving solutions to improve maternal health at Merck's For Mothers program. How is Merck using analytics and IoT devices to connect directly with consumers to remain competitive and achieve their strategic objectives?
Sure. Just for a little background, the program that Merck started 5 years ago, it's actually a 10-year program, $500 million, to look at reducing preventable maternal mortality around the world. And we spend a lot of time in Africa, and believe it or not, even in the United States, it's kind of sad that our country is one that's on the list of things of increasing maternal mortality. So with the program's about 5 years, and we're probably 3 years into our digital strategy, where we have currently 4 or 5 solutions that are out there into the marketplace. And we're just starting now with our strategy to connect all the different places. But we are starting to see a difference in things that we didn't think we would. So one example is one in which we almost have like a Yelp for help or Yelp type thing where we ask mothers as they come out of a hospital, so how was your experience? And they would rate their experience. And what we found, a couple things that were interesting, is number one, their standards of care weren't very high. So we had to actually help them understand what a standard of care should look like. Like, were you greeted? Were you allowed to hold the baby? Things in the United States we'd never think of. And so as we did that and they started to rate it, that feedback actually got back to those hospitals, and especially the public hospitals, and things started to change. And they started to improve. And it's like, wow, this might actually work. And that's within a year, which, if you know anything in healthcare, anything that happens within 10 years is amazing. But now what we're starting to do is connect some different services. So that's one that's at the end. We have other ones that are looking at collecting some information as the mother enters the hospitals, and some as she gets pregnant. And as you start to connect it, now we can start to risk stratify as she comes in, and to know if any of you have been to Africa, and I know it's some of the solutions there, or some of the hospitals or clinics, is not what we are used to here in the United States. And there may or may not be a physician available. There may or may not be any sort of healthcare provider. So now we can risk stratify that mother, and if we know she's a high-risk pregnancy, to send her to another place. So you might say a little bit, why does this really matter? A little bit to the Sustainable Development Goals by the UN, and one of the things that matters a real lot, and why Merck chose pregnancy and mothers, the mother is really key into the environment and into the social economic aspects of society. When a mother is lost at the time of childbirth, that child is 30% more likely to die before the age of 5, 70% more likely to live in poverty, and it just goes on from there. So you can see that there's a huge burden, so we're trying to start at the middle. But now we're collecting all of that and starting to see how does keeping the mother in good health and the child, how does that have economic impact throughout the whole area, including healthcare.
Thank you. Correlating to something Kevin talked about on digital singularity, can you provide some insights into design work in that space?
Yeah, I'll give another example on that. So one of the things that really started to come up with Merck for Mothers and some other areas we're working in is that people live in a context, right? So you live in a context in the United States, you live in a context when you're in Kenya or in Africa, and you live in a context we work a lot with Native American Indians. So I started really becoming interested in that. And what does that mean? And how do you measure? And how do you actually collect the data around the context in which you live? And so we started doing that. And we started understanding, a lot of people have heard about social determinants, right? What's your economics? And that's fine. But we added other things in there. What's your belief system? What are the things that are going around with the family system and such? And we did work with Native American Indians in central United States. And what we realized is that there's deep-set historical trauma with this particular group, and it actually matters in how you design your solutions and your digital solutions for them. So one of the things that we came up with after collecting some of this, and we're still in the very, very early stages of it, and really understanding the context of people and what they live in, and then how do you design digital solutions to trigger them in a way that's much more powerful. So one of the things they did is a Fitbit application. I'm sure we've all joined like 1,000 of them. It's usually based on competition, right? Can you outwalk your neighbor? Can you outwalk or whoever's in your group? And even for myself, I'm interested in that, but only for a short period of time. What they did is, if you know anything about the history of Native Americans, they were sort of kicked out of their homeland in Mississippi or whatever it was, and they walked a trail of tears, of which a majority of their whole society actually died during that, and this one group settled into Oklahoma. So what they did is they actually took them back in time. So the Fitbit application, depending on how much you walked, would slowly unveil to you your history. It would take you back to your homeland in Mississippi, and the more you walked and more the figures that would come up with that would be, like I said, be revealed, and that was very motivating. So I thought that was always a great example of understanding the context in which you live and designing then a solution that can open up something to you that you wouldn't bother with before. Now all of a sudden it became really important. So that was really powerful for me, and one small example of what you can do with design.
That was very interesting. Have you considered blockchain as a capability to support operations within the healthcare space?
Yeah, so blockchain has a lot of possibilities. We're still experimenting very much with it. I'm hoping the finance industry goes first and shows us how to do some of that. Where it's very useful for us is in a couple of spots. One is in counterfeit, right? So especially in some of the emerging markets, counterfeit products, probably for a lot of people, is a huge issue. If you have blockchain, can you actually then make sure that what gets to the distribution centers is the actual product? So that's one application of where you look through the whole thing. The second one we're playing with, which I think is a little bit more difficult but could be very powerful, is on your data. right? So there's a huge movement. Kevin talked about it a little bit. I'm running into it every time I go to a conference in that round, data privacy. Who owns your healthcare data? And right now there's a debate, right? Is it the hospital you went to? Is it your primary care physician? Well, it should be you. And how do you know you have the right data? And how can you take that data and actually give people rights to use it and then take it away? We see blockchain as a way to sort of look at that and how do you protect it along the way. I think we're ways off just because healthcare data is all over the place in so many different places. We have to kind of get it together first. But I think there's some really great examples of what we can use with it, but I think we're still in the early stages.
Thank you. And I'm so glad Cal is here because I was told about 10 minutes before this thing started that I would have to sit in that seat and play Cal. And I was going to ask Kevin for a shot of scotch before I started. So, Cal, so with your deep experience in pharma, can you share some insights into IoT devices and privacy, security, and regulatory requirements in that space?
Sure, happy to. As we're seeing across all industries, there's this move towards from dumb to connected smart devices. In the pharma and medtech industry, you have the same things happening, except as we've been talking about, the industries we work in often are delayed versus consumer and other industries. And some of the challenges, particularly in pharma and medtech, are around, as Michele alluded to, around privacy, security, and the regulatory requirements. And what you have is you have a product development life cycle that's typically around in pharma, 10 to 12 years between when you found an asset that you think might have potential, therapeutic potential, and the process you have to go through to get that through the approval process. And so all of the systems and processes and governance is built around a product life cycle that's 10 to 12 years. And now what you're trying to do is overlay technology that's changing, in the case of, let's say, connectivity technology that might be changing in the course of a couple of years, but certainly software that's driving this that you would expect to be changing, at a minimum every couple of months, if not even more often. So you have this fundamental disconnect around companies that are built to build products, over a 10 to 12 horizon versus 10 to 12 year horizon versus, trying to leverage technologies that are fundamentally, defined in a few months. So you have that first challenge. The second challenge you have in innovating in this environment is around the fact that, again, in pharma and medtech, certainly in pharma, the product that you bring to market, your first product, you want it to be your last product. And what I mean by that is you're eliminating all variability. You want the exact same drug to be produced in every vial, every dose, et cetera, and for good reason, of course. Again, the mindset is the complete opposite when you think about innovating in digital. The first version is the worst version. All the examples that my fellow colleagues have been talking about here, it's all about having an idea, rapidly bringing that into some kind of environment, and then you're learning and iterating and improving. And that's, again, fundamentally not the way that it works in the pharma industry for its core products. And so now you overlay the requirements of privacy and security and regulatory on top of that, and it becomes a true challenge because there's fundamentally on top of that platform, on top of that context, firstly, you don't have a lot of expertise around software and digital innovation. Secondly, the pharma companies typically have been dealing with, when they gather data, it typically comes in a couple of key environments. One is it's data that's collected in a clinical trial setting, so it has its own rigid box against which that patient data is being collected, or it's being collected in patient support programs. So it's how do you help people sort of learn about your drug, perhaps access copay assistance, things like that. And now when you move into regulated software products, you're talking about collecting clinical data in potentially near real time or continuously on a commercialized product, and then protecting that information and using that information to enhance and provide better support to your patients. And this is a whole new paradigm shift that the companies historically don't have deep experience both in how do you manage that data, how do you keep it secure, and how do you turn that into insight, and then be able to deploy that insight in a way that is appropriate from a regulatory perspective.
That's very interesting. So talk about paradigm shift. So my personal experience is in aerospace and defense, and the digital twin is starting to become a requirement from Department of Defense. Is there any use cases you're looking in the pharma space that will leverage that capability?
Well, yeah, yes and no. So I think there is a paradigm shift coming, and the way I think about it is today the pharma industry still lives in a world of what sort of fee for service, if you will, which is prescription gets written and filled at the pharmacy or specialty pharmacy, and they get paid. After that day, what happens to the drug is largely unknown and in many ways irrelevant because whether that person goes and never takes that drug, they inappropriately take it, they take it appropriately, and whether they respond and reach the efficacy goal or not. Of course, there's a sort of a feedback loop because someone will typically obviously discontinue use of something that's not working after a while. But from a pharmaceutical perspective and a reimbursement perspective, what their goal is to get that prescription written. And what connected technologies is allowing you to do is, I think we're in the very early days of moving shifting that paradigm to a journey of what we call value-based care. And just to give you sort of a couple of potential milestones along the way, the first is if you have connected drug delivery devices, now you can change the insurance model from I got paid because the prescription got filled to I get paid because the patient actually took the drug, because you have that data, right? Did the injection for that insulin pen go off, for that rheumatoid arthritis drug, et cetera, right? And so now you're moving a little bit up the value chain to say, hey, it's not enough to just have the prescription be filled. You actually need to provide patient support programs that are encouraging them to take the therapy as appropriate, as prescribed. And then you can imagine moving up the chain from there into proxies or direct measurements of efficacy. So for a lot of diseases, you can track things today in a regulated environment with biometric sensors that could be good proxies for how is that patient doing on their Parkinson's treatment, on their multiple sclerosis treatment, on their rheumatoid arthritis treatment, cardiovascular, et cetera. And so I think we're in these early days of the shift that'll happen, especially as drugs continue to get more and more expensive. And we need to change the paradigm from you convince the doctor and the patient that they should write that prescription and fill it to show me measures of real world adoption, appropriate utilization, and ultimately efficacy.
Great, thank you. Now, one of the challenges as a CIO is driving change within an organization, which is difficult. And as we go into innovative, disruptive technologies, I wanted to turn to the panel and ask them how they've experienced. So, Michele, coming back to you, for the business to fully realize the benefits of digital disruption, they must be committed to, at all levels, to be bold, embrace cultural change, and empower change agents. What have been some of your challenges in that space?
So I talked about, we went through a transformation in our IT organization over the last year and a half. Had a lot of change management that happened, bringing people along, looking at the digital disruption that's ahead of us and thinking through how do we skill our people in a different way. So we've partnered with our HR organization to train our people up because there's a lot of gaps in skills out there in RPA and IoT and other technologies. Security. So, that pool is small, and you're always tapping the same individuals. So we've taken a different tactic, and we're doing that from within. Now, the fascinating thing is, now that we went first, the rest of our organization, the business is going through a transformation and a reorg because our CEO has put out some lofty goals for us to hit by 2020, 2021. So it's interesting watching the business now start to go through everything that we went through on, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to basically, keep the plane flying while we're building it at the same time? How are we going to train our people? Because technologies like RPA can be scary. People think about robots. A robot is going to replace me. And so, we've started talking again, like I said earlier, in terms of hours given back from the business, back to the business. If you can talk about the value in terms of that, it becomes less scary for people. So then they think, well, maybe my job won't go away. Maybe a robot isn't going to take away my work. But when you dig in and find out they want that manual work to go away anyway, they just don't know the path forward. forward, and they don't know how to train themselves up. So that's a big initiative for us right now, is to figure out how we train our people up, how we bring in different organizations outside of us that know how to do that, to train our people on these technologies. But the key is, it's not just training our IT associates, it's training our business associates too, because they need to understand the business process that's foundational while we put the technology on top of it. So it really goes hand in hand together, and you have to look at the entire ecosystem from end to end, because if you're only looking at a piece of it, you're going to miss it.
That's right. Michele, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I think the digital age is going to significantly disrupt business models, right? If you look at Merck and some of the long-standing pharma companies, Merck's 127, 128 years old, been very successful. But the digital age will change that, and already the company's really looking at what that means. Does Amazon become your distribution channel? Does, all sorts of things. But it'll start to go to culture. And where I've been really fortunate is that I get to work on the fringe a lot. So I talked about some philanthropic work with Merck from others in this separate organization called Healthcare Services and Solutions. And it's a different independent organization for many reasons. One is regulations, but the other is culture. How do you truly start to look at a culture that is going to be much faster? It includes a lot of startups, right? So go fast, fail fast. I remember one time I was talking to somebody in our area that was doing a lot of forecasting and some work, and they said, oh, God, it's horrible. I have to reforecast and rethink things every 6 years now. And I'm like, 6 years? Holy mackerel. I'm lucky if I get 6 months. So they're just not used to the change and the speed we need to work at. So working in these separate organizations allows me to do that. On top of that, working in emerging markets. So when you work in Africa and some of these other areas in Singapore and others, right, you can move so much faster. And it doesn't eliminate risk, but you think about how to assess your risk differently. And I think that's going to be some of the significant change that digital is going to bring in that culture components of how to move forward and how to have appropriate risk taking.
Thank you. Cal, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. From a hiring perspective, as companies pursue these new innovative technologies, what are some of the challenges and hurdles that you are facing in finding qualified resources like data scientists, analysts, et cetera?
Yeah, I think that's actually very related to the previous question, right, and then the comments that have been made. So it's a few things. First is finding the right talent, which depending on the types of businesses, products you're building, could be quite rare. The second is creating an environment where that talent will actually want to come and work at. And then third is enabling them to be successful, which obviously then feeds into retention. And my experience has been, and there's been positive and negative experiences that I've learned from here, certainly in the healthcare digital technology space. There's a lot of interest in that area, but there isn't a lot of talent that has specifically deep operational experience in the very complicated, regulated healthcare industry and the kind of innovation capabilities you want, whether it's in the data sciences side, IoT side, et cetera. And so I'll give an example of a model that we're working on right now that so far has been successful for us. My group has gone from a team of 1 to 80 something in the last 18 months or so. And a couple of things I would highlight. First, I work in a very engineering-driven company. Flex, this is what we do, is help design and make products. Yet, only one person in my entire organization is from the legacy corporation, because it's fundamentally a different technology and engineering, et cetera, skill set that I'm looking for. So how did we achieve that kind of growth? And not to say that we still have our challenges, but and so we're continuing to innovate our approach. But we did a few things. First, we stood it up as a separate organization. I think along the lines you're describing there, Michele. So we're literally a separate legal entity, wholly owned by Flex. So that lets us really position our market ourselves as a startup in a big company. Now, having gone through a non-optimal startup experience in a big company, I sort of brought a lot of learnings from that. So we've done a few things. The only thing that I really interface with the mothership on is shared services. And it's a take it or leave it. Everything else from a technology perspective, from a quality management system perspective, from you name it, compensation perspective, et cetera, is completely up to us. I have, essentially one boss, that's the CEO. That's who I have to align with, obviously, the CFO. But as long as we have alignment there, everything else cascades down. And so I can leverage the great capabilities that you can get from a large company without being hamstrung by all of the processes and bureaucracies and sort of boxes that you need to operate on. So how we translated that, we've done things like, we go to the tech meetups. We market in totally different environments. We have our own landing page and all the stuff we do. We just literally yesterday, our leadership team shot a video that we're going to use for marketing to attract people to us. We're also implementing phantom stock. So I think this is, we'll see how this lever plays out. But I've lost candidates that are saying, hey, I'm going to go to this Series A fintech because I'm getting 1.5% of the option pool. And I love what you're doing, but where's my chance to hit it big? So we're again creating a phantom stock pool, defining it against operating metrics, similarly to the way that you might value a true startup. So then you need to take those kinds of approaches because ultimately, at least my opinion is, other approaches can get you started, but it's really hard to break through, and it's really hard to retain that kind of talent and to keep growing. Beyond sort of small proof of concept projects.
Thank you. Michele, any thoughts?
No, I mean, I'd agree. And I think how do you leverage the brand of the mothership, right? But still offer something attractive and not at least in pharma, right? And such the conservatism. So I think we've also gone wherever the talent is, right? Digital's really helped. It opened up the market. And if you want to live in Fargo, North Dakota, that's your choice, fine. I'm not a cold weather person, but that's where we hire them, right? So you can kind of get it all the way out there, including worldwide. So now the world got really small, and you hire them whenever you can, because it's really hard to find somebody that's good, that can bring the insights. So it's not just a great mathematician, but a great mathematician that really understands the context and what problem you're trying to solve and how to bring that forward. So it is a war for talent, especially in the analytics space and informatics. A lot of people are getting into it, but that's a pretty hot field. It's hard.
Thank you.
I think for us, the challenge is that getting our leaders to think that digital disruption is going to happen to us, and why can't we be the ones to be the disruptor? So that's a lot of what we are working on culturally, internally, is to get people to think bigger, think outside the box, think about our customers first, and think about them in a very different way. It goes back to the customer experience that Michele was talking about. And so when we look at talent, bringing those folks in that can think outside the box, that can speak up, that can challenge, and they don't have to be in our industry, is what is going to catapult us. We just can't be afraid of it. And so that's a lot of the foundation that we're trying to build now, is to say, why not us, and take that the next step further.
Thank you. That was very, very good. Bottom line, maintaining status quo is no longer an option, if I can read into that.